Well, let's get right to it, folks. On a very busy Thursday, NBC's Garrett Haake is right here in Milwaukee on the convention floor. Gabe Gutierrez is with President Biden in Delaware, where he is resting and getting better. And Vitali is on Capitol Hill. Garrett, I want to start with you. The campaign saying President Trump has personally rewritten this speech himself or dictated it to aides who are writing down his words. Do you have any indication of what this message of unity will look like tonight?
Well, look, Kristen, I think the best indication is from Donald Trump's own record here. And what we know about this speech specifically is that he is going to talk about the shooting experience from Saturday at the top. And then I think we're going to hear sort of a more polished version of what we typically hear from him on the campaign trail. But his version of unity has tended to mean unifying around him. I don't expect to see Donald Trump move in any significant way off his more aggressive policy postures, things like mass deportations, issues like that sometimes drive people out of the Republican or the Trump camp. I think you might hear the tone change here, but the substance will be largely the same as what we're used to, other than trying to rally people around him from the assassination attempt on Saturday. I think from my conversations with some of his advisors and with his son, Eric Trump, this morning, there's also going to be an emphasis on that moment in particular from Saturday when he stood up with his fists in the air and encouraged people to fight. There's a little bit of a tension here between the idea of a unifying message, but also we have to fight because, as Eric Trump said to me, everything is terrible. How you balance that tonally, I cannot say. That is why I am not a paid political speechwriter.
Well, Garrett, you've been signaling that from the start, though, and rightfully so, that this is still Donald Trump. And so there may be a message of unity, but this self-proclaimed counterpuncher is not necessarily going to back away from some of that imagery. Garrett, let's talk about more broadly about this week that you and I have witnessed here, this show of unity within the Republican Party. Quite frankly, yes, there are differences over policies, fierce ones over abortion, over issues of Ukraine and the economy, quite frankly, as well. And yet, this week, it's clear this is a party that is solidly behind Donald Trump.
100%, Kristen. And think about how difference a year makes. I mean, I remember about this time a year ago, we were in that deluge of indictments falling on Donald Trump. It seemed like one every other week. The party was in panic because his numbers were improving against his primary rivals. And it was the Republicans worried that they were going to be saddled with an incumbent essentially running as their nominee who could not win in a general election. Now, fast forward to the present, and they have their incumbent, their nominee, who they feel like is very much in the driver's seat. I would say nothing breeds unity like victory, and the feeling here, certainly among the convention delegates, among Republican lawmakers, is if they don't screw this up, Republicans will be in power perhaps across the board next year in Washington, and that's going to make any politician or any politically inclined Republican feel pretty good and feel pretty good about their nominee.
And Garrett, very quickly, the reaction inside Trump world to J.D. Vance's speech, his big debut last night here at the National Convention.
Yeah, look, Trump advisors and allies who I spoke to were pleased with J.D. Vance's speech. They thought he certainly did no harm. He did a good job of introducing himself and kind of trying to bring the message in a targeted way to the middle of the country where he's expected to be effective. I do think there's some acknowledgement that given how interesting his biography is and kind of how high the theoretical ceiling is for him, that last night's speech is a combination of perhaps lack of experience in this medium, if you will, maybe didn't exactly hit it out of the ballpark rhetorically or in terms of excitement, but there's time for him to learn on the road.
That is for sure. Garrett Haake, thank you for your fantastic reporting. We'll be checking back in with you throughout the afternoon and evening. That is for sure. Gabe, let me turn to you now. You are there in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, where President Biden is recovering from COVID. Let's start with this incredible reporting from our NBC News team that President Biden's advisors are starting to, quite frankly, see the writing on the wall about his campaign. As you all reported, one source saying, quote, "We're close to the end." That's a pretty stunning statement.
Certainly, Kristen. And look, it's not just that quote, but there's another quote in there. It's not a question of if, but when. And what a difference just a few days makes, Kristen. You'll recall earlier this week, in the immediate aftermath of that assassination attempt on former President Trump, it really seemed like the calls for President Biden to leave this race had stalled, or at least subsided for a bit. They have ramped up considerably over the last few days and have reached quite a height today, after we've been hearing about these meetings between President Biden and prominent Democrats. Also, Adam Schiff yesterday coming out and calling on President Biden publicly to lead the race. But according to NBC News reporting, multiple people that are aware with the internal dynamics, yes, they see that there's the writing on the wall. Donor money has been drying up, now projected to be just 25% of what they expected in July. Still, the White House and the campaign are aggressively pushing back hard on that narrative. One source close to President Biden says that they feel that some of this are people second-guessing the campaign, and that back in 2015, back when President Biden was vice president, there were some scars from when top Democrats pushed him out in favor of Hillary Clinton, and that didn't work out for the party in the view of this advisor. Kristen?
Gabe, of course, this all comes as President Biden remains defiant publicly. He gave another interview to BET. What were your big takeaways from that interview?
Well, he gave one to BET where he talked about, he was asked if there was anything that could potentially get him to leave the race. And he did acknowledge, or at least allow for the possibilities if his doctors told him that he had some sort of medical condition. Of course, this was before his COVID diagnosis. But today we also heard another interview, Kristen, this one a radio interview with Univision. And he was asked about whether he felt betrayed by the party. Listen to that.
Do you feel betrayal? In what do you tell them?
Look, I had a terrible night on the debate night. I was exhausted. I had been traveling around the world. I wasn't ready. And I performed terribly. And so people are now saying, well, that was only one thing. But he's 81 years old. What happens when he's 84 years old? What happens, excuse me, when he's 85 years old? I was smart enough to know with age comes wisdom.
And Kristen, you heard that cough there from the president. Now, that interview was conducted just before he was tested for COVID, and he tested positive. But you hear in that interview his raspy voice really speaking to the concern that so many Democrats have, and raising even more questions about his health. Kristen?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Gabe Gutierrez from Delaware. Thank you so much, Gabe. Really appreciate it. Ali Vitali, let me turn to you. You have been all over this reporting that Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi had these blunt, frank calls with, a call in a meeting, I should say, with President Biden. Does it feel like the pressure campaign is reaching a critical mass, like something is shifting?
Yes, and I know that you've been all over this too. All of us are really working the phones and making calls, trying to get as close to this as possible, because the reality is only two people were in those rooms when those meetings were happening, especially in the case of Chuck Schumer, where we're told that it was a blunt conversation. The same can be said for Hakeem Jeffries, the top House Democrat, and of course, Nancy Pelosi and the role that she still plays, even though she is no longer Speaker and no longer leader in this House Democratic Party. She is still so revered as a thought leader and someone who members really respect the opinion of. At the same time, her comments on Morning Joe, 2 weeks ago now, very much stirred the pot here on Capitol Hill. Folks were already panicked about the president politically, health-wise. That only served to further extend the purgatory period, frankly, that we have been in for House and Senate Democrats over the course of time since that debate. It does feel, though, Kristen, like yesterday evening's series of leaks about those blunt meetings really did turn us to a new phase of this. I mean, members have already been in a sense of panic, in a sense of being fraught about what's going to happen next. But it does feel like next week could be a real moment of significance here as members come back to Capitol Hill. Of course, I'm pretty much alone in the halls right now of Congress. They are home on recess, but that does not mean that they are not talking to each other. Members are having serious conversations, maybe a little bit more difficult to organize themselves when they're not physically in the same zip code, but at the same time, those conversations are still ongoing, and a lot of members are paying attention to each move the president makes. They are certainly reading our reporting that folks in his orbit feel like the writing may be on the wall, and I have to tell you that around this building, when you think about Congress in a theoretical sense, the electeds I'm talking to seem to have a sense right now of maybe it's not a matter of if, but when he steps down.
Yeah, one source who I spoke with described this as a sad moment for the Democratic Party. Vitali, try to get a little rest and gear up for what could be a busy week. Really appreciate it. Joining me now on set is NBC News chief political analyst Chuck Todd. Chuck, wow, we've covered some headlines, but this is an extraordinary moment in which we find ourselves. Can you set the stage? I mean, where do you think we are in this? Will he or won't he pass the torch?
Look, I think now it's impossible for Biden to stay in, even if he wants to stay in, because there's too many Democrats on the record saying he needs to get out. They question whether he can serve another term. How do they suddenly put that toothpaste back in the tube? Let's say they do it, and you try to put Biden out there. How do these people answer the question in their own political debates, in their own interviews with local television and with bloggers and with podcasts and all of with regular voters? They're sitting here right now, basically the leaders of the Democratic Party making the case to the country, this man cannot serve another 4 years. Hard stop. By the way, we don't think he can win, but many of them are simply saying he can't serve another 4 years. How do they flip that? So at this point, essentially, he's been forced off, because I don't think we're getting to the point where I don't think he can win the nomination with his own delegates. Okay, he's losing control of that process too. So I'm not going to get into his head, but you know, this is going to be there's only Hunter Biden and Joe Biden left to tell him it's pretty clear to me that many of the non-relatives have come to a certain conclusion. People with the last name of Biden have not.
Yeah, it's and
that's where we're at right now. Yeah, which is what you would expect in Biden.
I was going to say, ultimately, it is going to be a conversation and decision that he makes with family, right?
That's right. And you know, he's at home. He's in Rehoboth. All the family's there. So you know, is it this weekend? Is it? But this is unsustainable, and now his campaign is unwinnable.
Let me read what you wrote in your latest column last night. You wrote, quote, "The walls are closing in on Biden. His COVID diagnosis Wednesday and the subsequent need to isolate due to his age makes it only that much harder for Biden to try to convince Democratic leaders that his debate performance was simply one bad night. The only question now is whether he succumbs to the pressure before the Democratic convention delegates themselves take matters into their own hands." Do you think, Chuck, that the party's basically saying we can do this the easy way or we can do this the hard way?
And well, they tried to do it the easy way.
Yeah, right. That's right. Now that's past.
You know, and it looks like it looks like this campaign to try to persuade him to do this perhaps has been months in the making, not days or weeks or any of that. And I'll tell you, I think we're all starting to wonder. Perhaps the early debate there was some intention here with this early debate to be like, okay, we've got to have this conversation out in the open, because we're not having it. Nothing's happening very well behind closed doors.
Well, one of the things that I think you've been struck by, that I've been struck by watching the Republican National Convention, is how unified this party is. And it is a reminder of the clock that is ticking. President Biden said in his press conference, the campaign hasn't started. It starts after Labor Day. Feels like it started quite a long time ago when you're sitting right here.
And in some ways, the success of this convention has, I think, almost makes it impossible for Biden to be able to make the case. Now, look, it's possible. Look, we haven't seen any good polling yet, because you can't. We don't. The assassination attempt, how voters are sort of digesting that. I don't think you can get a snap poll and feel like you understand that. I think this speech tonight, you know, we have gone from 6 weeks ago, the public had wanted nothing to do with this presidential race, right? Now, look, he's got an opportunity tonight. When I mean he, the former president, Donald Trump, for the first time, I think people who had not wanted to hear from him are going to be like, let me see. All right, I'll see. Let me see if this is. So he is got an opportunity tonight. If there's a new Democratic nominee, that candidate is going to have an opportunity. So all of a sudden, we're going to go from a campaign. And this is what, I mean, when you talk about upending the chessboard, you know, if there is a new, all of a sudden you may have a newly engaged electorate because, frankly, these plot twists are better than watching Presumed Innocent on Apple TV Plus these days.
And who could have anticipated this many plot twists?
Honestly, I would have rolled my eye. I like to read the occasional political novel. You'd thrown all this in here and give me a break.
Could never
That's
happen.
Not the way the world works.
Not reality, right? Well, give us the reality check on the polls, because that's the one thing that has allowed Biden to stay resistant. The fact that, to a large extent so far, and again, I'm not factoring in what's happened in the wake of the assassination attempt against former President Trump, but this has been a remarkably stable race to some extent.
But for 25 years, we've been in a remarkable stable position. You know, and I do believe now, though, that we 1 point shifts are big deals.
Yeah, right.
And I think we have to start to understand that when you see a consistent, and look, I'm a big, you know, I think the worst thing to do is to combine polls. The best thing to do is watch trend lines. And when all different types of polling, even, you know, ones you don't like the methodology, when you start to see similar trends, then it's worth seeing that. You know, combining them in the blender is a terrible idea, but unfortunately, Real Clear Politics and 538 have ruined the polling industry by what they've done over the last decade. And I will have this fight in public anytime all these people want. But what I will say is that I think that we should respect 1 point movements as significant. They're not insignificant. In the 90s, we'd have 5 point swings and 10 point swings because we weren't as polarized. We're pretty set in our ways, which is why both parties have high floors and low ceilings. Okay, we like to say Trump has a high floor and low ceiling. Both parties have high floors and low ceilings, which is why you're not going to see a ton of movement.
You talk about the fact that Trump has an opportunity tonight. What will you be watching for tonight?
If he talks to voters that are not MAGA and not even Republicans. You know, I do think when we hear unity, we think, oh, is he going to reach out to people that are not Republican? I believe when they say unity, it's Nikki Haley.
Yeah, right.
Okay, and I mean that. Like, they're like, no, we're unified as a party. That's unity.
Yeah.
And maybe some of us on the outside of the parties are going, no, we think unity is
the whole country.
Right, you know, which I think we probably are misinterpreting them. I think they do mean unity in a different way, and they've been unified as a party. Yeah. Right? So that's, you know, but look, I fully believe if he would show a little bit of humility about, hey, I made some, I really have said this before, both presidents have failed the country in bringing us together. Well, if one of them would admit it, I actually think they could benefit.
That's a great point.
You know, neither one will admit that they have failed to bring the country together.
Yeah.
And if one of them, I mean, you sort of have to give voters who gave up on you once. Yeah. You have to give. Well, what are you going to do differently? It's like when you break up with somebody. Why are we getting back together? I've changed, honey. Okay. How have you changed? We're going to get married.
Hear that
I need to hear
acknowledgement.
It. Yeah. And I'm not sure I'm going to hear that today.
Well, we'll be listening closely, and I know you will be too. Chuck, thanks so much for all of your brilliant thoughts. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.